night the sea rose was the night the sky burned with a strange, violet fire. Nobody in Thalassia had ever seen it before. The city shimmered under the golden lamps, streets bustling with merchants, children laughing, and sailors preparing their boats for the next day's journey. Towering spires reflected in the calm waters of the harbour, and the air smelled of salt spices and smoke from cooking fires. In the marketplace, Althea, a young scholar, ran her fingers over a scroll, filled with the history of her city. "Tonight is a good night," she whispered to herself, unaware of the tremors beneath her feet. Nearby, Captain Dorian inspected his ship, its sails neatly furled, ropes coiled, eyes scanning the horizon as if sensing something he could not name. Meanwhile, in the royal palace, King Tharen studied the stars through his telescope, noticing constellations that seemed to shift unnaturally. "The heavens themselves are restless tonight," he murmured to his advisor, Seneca, who nodded gravely, a shadow of fear crossing his face. Far from the center of the city, in a quiet lane, young twins Lyra and Kale played near the fountains, their laughter echoing in the cobblestone streets. Unseen by them, the ground began to pulse, a rhythm like a heartbeat, subtle at first, then stronger, as if the city itself were alive and warning them. By the edge of the cliffs, the fishermen noticed unusual ripples in the sea, waves curling backward, the water glowing faintly under the moonlight. "Something is coming," murmured old Morrow, who had seen the ocean's moods for decades. His voice trembled, but none of the others paid him heed, busy with their nightly routines. Then, without warning, the sky cracked open with a deafening roar, a sound that shook the foundations of every home. Lightning, unlike any natural storm, streaked across the clouds in jagged purple veins, and the ground heaved violently, throwing carts and barrels into the air. People screamed, clutching loved ones, while others ran blindly into the streets. From the harbour, Dorian's ship pitched violently as the waters surged upward, a monstrous wave forming in the distance, taller than the city walls. "To the hills, to the hills," he shouted. But the city streets twisted unnaturally, confusing even the most familiar paths. India Palace. Tharen tried to gather his guards, but the walls trembled and collapsed in slow, grinding motions. Seneca held tightly to the king's arm, dragging him toward the outer gardens. But chunks of stone fell around them, cutting paths that were once familiar. Alarms rang, bells clanged, and the city was engulfed in chaos unlike any before. As the wave approached, it carried with it debris, ships, and the very rooftops of Thalassia. Screams mingled with the roar of the storm, and a strange, heavy silence fell beneath the sound, a stillness that felt unnatural, as if the world itself had paused in fear. The water touched the first streets, and those who had not fled were swept away instantly, swallowed by the glowing, violet sea. The wave moved like a living entity, devouring everything in its path. Market stalls, homes, and bridges vanished beneath the glowing water, leaving only fleeting shadows of their existence. Lyra and Kale clung to each other, trying to run, but the streets had become a labyrinth of broken stones and surging currents. Captain Dorian fought to secure his crew, shouting orders over the deafening roar. His ship groaned, wooden beams splintering as monstrous waves slammed against it. The harbour was now unrecognizable. Docks torn apart, ships upside down, the very sea itself churned with unnatural fury. Althea, clutching her scroll, stumbled toward the city's library, hoping to find refuge, only to see the enormous wave descend upon the spired rooftops. The library's walls crumbled, sending books and scrolls floating into the violet waters. She dove into the nearest alleyway, barely avoiding falling debris. In the palace, King Tharen and Seneca ran through collapsing corridors. Statues of gods toppled, and crystal chandeliers shattered into the air, reflecting the storm's eerie purple glow. As they reached the outer gardens, the ground began to split, fissures swallowing everything in a terrifying gulp. The king fell into one, Seneca grabbing his hand, pulling him to safety moments before it closed. Old Morrow stood atop a cliff, eyes wide with horror, witnessing centuries of civilization disappear in mere minutes. "The sea remembers," he whispered, clutching a pendant that had survived storms long forgotten. "He takes back what once belonged to it." Suddenly, the ground shuddered again, and a deeper rumble resonated through the city. From the ocean depths, dark shapes rose, ancient pillars, ruins that hinted at a civilization older than any living memory. It was as if Thalassia itself had been built atop the bones of a forgotten world. The wave, now towering like a mountain of liquid amethyst, smashed into the royal palace, lifting walls and towers into the air. King Tharen and Seneca barely escaped, plunging into a smaller, faster-moving current that carried them away from the palace ruins. Screams echoed, and the city's bells, still ringing despite the chaos, sent vibrations through the air like warnings from the gods themselves. Althea, still clutching her scroll, tried to run toward higher ground, but the streets were no longer recognizable. The water had swallowed alleys, bridges, and even entire squares. Floating debris smashed against her, tossing her helplessly. Just as she thought the end was inevitable, a large piece of wreckage drifted nearby, and she clung to it, carried by the monstrous wave toward unknown safety. Even as the water engulfed Thalassia, the sky above shimmered with unnatural colors, lightning dancing endlessly across the clouds. Those few who survived the initial onslaught could only watch as the entire city, with all its history, knowledge, and life, disappeared beneath the glowing violet sea. By the time dawn approached, Thalassia had vanished from sight, leaving only a vast shimmering expanse of violet-tinged water. Survivors, scattered along cliffs and hillsides, stared in disbelief at what had once been their home. Smoke, splintered wood, and floating debris marked the spots where bustling streets and proud towers had stood hours before. Althea clung to her makeshift raft, shivering from exhaustion and shock. She could see faint silhouettes of people in the distance, some trying to help one another, others frozen in grief. The wave's energy had scattered the population, and the few who survived had been carried miles from the city's former location. Captain Dorian's ship, miraculously intact, though battered, drifted alongside the cliffs. He scanned the horizon, shouting orders, coordinating rescue for those clinging to floating wreckage. The sailors worked tirelessly, pulling people aboard. Though many were lost to the violent currents or the ever-surging tide, King Tharen, soaked and battered, had found temporary refuge on a rocky outcrop. His advisors tried to regroup, comforting the frightened survivors. "The gods have spared us," Seneca murmured, though his voice trembled. "But Thalassia, it is gone." Tharen could only stare at the horizon, the realization of loss, heavier than any crown. Lyra and Kale, still holding on to each other, drifted with Althea, clinging to a piece of shattered marketplace. Their small voices called for their parents, but only the wind carried their cries across the empty sea. The twins didn't understand why everything they loved had been swallowed in one terrifying night. As the survivors tried to come to terms with the disaster, a strange phenomenon occurred. The water around the ruins glowed faintly, as if the city itself were breathing beneath the surface. Morrow, standing at the cliffs, whispered, "It remembers us. Thalassia remembers." Some dismissed him as a fearful old man, but others felt an inexplicable chill, a sense that the city's spirit lingered below, waiting. Over the following hours, storms calmed, but the sea remained unnaturally still above the sunken city. The coastline was littered with debris, half-sunken ships, and personal belongings of the lost. Archaeologists and sailors in the future would call this the Night of the Violet Sea, a calamity so sudden that it became legend across generations. Althea, Dorian, and the twins huddled together, realizing they were among the few who had survived. They shared stories of the night, trying to remember what had been lost. Each recounted the violet lightning, the towering waves, and the impossible rumblings from beneath the city's foundations. Even as they mourned, a deeper understanding began to settle in their hearts. Thalassia's disappearance was not just destruction, but a transformation. The city, now resting in the depths, was preserved in a strange, eternal state, untouched by human hands. Someday, perhaps centuries from now, explorers or scholars might uncover its secrets beneath the onion sea. Days turned into weeks, and the survivors of Thalassia tried to rebuild their lives on the hills and cliffs surrounding the city's former location. Yet none could forget the violet sea or the night when their world was swallowed whole. The ocean, usually a source of life and sustenance, had become a monument to loss, a reminder of how swiftly nature could reclaim what humanity believed eternal. Althea spent hours drawing sketches of the city as she remembered it, the spires, the bustling markets, the fountains, and even the tiny details of lantern-lit streets. Her hands trembled as she recreated the harbor where Dorian's ships had bobbed moments before being torn apart. She vowed to record every memory, every detail, so that future generations might understand what had been lost beneath the waves. Dorian organized expeditions along the surviving coastline, trying to locate any remnants of the sunken city that could be salvaged. Divers reported strange formations under the water, remnants of walls and towers glowing faintly in the depths, untouched by decay, as if protected by some unseen force. Each glimpse of these ruins inspired both awe and fear. Thalassia had not disappeared entirely. It lingered below, silent yet alive. Lyra and Kale, still shaken from the night of destruction, found comfort in the stories of their parents and the other survivors. They would often sit by the cliffs, staring into the violet horizon, imagining the city beneath the waves, full of secrets waiting to be discovered. The twins began to sketch shapes they had seen from the waves, hinting at streets, squares, and the faint outlines of towers. Meanwhile, scholars and priests debated the cause of the disaster. Some claimed it was divine punishment, a celestial judgment upon a city that had grown too proud. Others believed it to be a rare, natural event, a perfect storm combined with an earthquake beneath the sea that had sent a wave of unimaginable force over Thalassia. But the more careful observers could not deny the unnatural phenomena: the violet lightning, the pulsating rumblings beneath the foundations, and the glowing waters that seemed to preserve the ruins rather than destroy them. One night, weeks after the disaster, Althea dreamed of the city. She walked through streets she had never set foot on, the air alive with the hum of life from centuries past. She saw the fountains flowing with crystal water, the marketplaces alive with merchants, and the towers standing proud against the violet-lit sky. At the center of the city, she saw a massive crystal embedded in the plaza, radiating a gentle light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. She awoke with a start, convinced that the city beneath the waves was not gone, it was waiting, preserved by some ancient force that defied human understanding. Months turned into years, yet Thalassia remained submerged beneath the violet-tinted sea. His survivors adapted to life on the cliffs, but every story, every song, every whispered memory carried the weight of the lost city. Althea's sketches became a sacred record, passed down to children who would never see the streets or towers she so vividly remembered. One day, a strange phenomenon occurred. The sea above the sunken city shimmered unnaturally, as if reacting to the memory of those who had survived. Fishermen reported faint lights moving beneath the waves, glimmering outlines of buildings, and the distant sound of bells echoes from the past that refused to die. It was as if Thalassia had become a living memory, visible only to those who remembered its streets, its laughter, and its proud towers. Captain Dorian, now older and grayer, gazed at the sea from his cliffside refuge. He had spent years trying to understand the forces that had swallowed the city. It was no ordinary disaster, he murmured to Althea, now his closest confidant. Something ancient, something beyond our knowledge, preserved it rather than destroyed it. Thalassia waits. The twins, Lyra and Kale, had grown into young adults, carrying with them the memories of a city they had barely understood, but deeply loved. They would dive into the shallow waters near the cliffs, searching for fragments, hoping to touch the ruins of streets and towers. Sometimes, in the gentle light of dawn, they claimed to see glimpses of the city beneath the waves, flickering like a half-remembered dream. Althea continued her research, convinced that the city's preservation was no accident. The crystal she had seen in her dream, she theorized, had absorbed the city's essence, protecting it from decay. Scientists and scholars in the future would discover remnants, uncovering Thalassia's secrets, but they would never fully understand the force that had saved it from total annihilation. At night, when the wind carried whispers across the cliffs, survivors would hear faint laughter, distant footsteps, and the echo of bells ringing beneath the sea. The city's heartbeat, it seemed, still pulsed, reminding the living that Thalassia had not vanished, had merely slipped into another realm, waiting for those who remembered to rediscover its wonders. Generations later, explorers would dive into the violet waters, guided by the stories of Althea, Dorian, and the twins. They would find streets, towers, and artifacts preserved perfectly beneath the waves. And though centuries had passed, Thalassia would continue to whisper its secrets to anyone brave enough to listen. proving that even in destruction, some cities are never truly lost. The night the sea arose was the night the city disappeared. But it was also the night Thalassia became eternal, hidden beneath the waves, a monument to memory, mystery, and the indomitable spirit of those who once called it home.